Central banks are a tremendous danger. They are all heads of a criminal organization. Danger. 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 Democratic states are deterioration. The democratic equality before the law is something completely incompatible with the idea of one universal law applying to every person in exactly the same way. Everyone can become king. Everyone can become king. Everyone can become king, so to speak. In the form of the difference between a higher public law that applies to public officials and a lower private law that applies to regular folks. Under democracy, everyone is equal insofar as entry into government is open to all on equal terms. If as a private person, I simply take your money out of your wallet, this is considered to be a criminal offense and I will be punished. If as a public official I come to you and do exactly the same thing, this falls under public law, is considered to be a legal activity. So to speak. If there's a private law, I take you and beat you up and force you to work for me day and night. This would be considered kidnapping, slavery and whatever, and is of course a great offense. If I do that as a public official, then it is called public service, military draft, and things like this is perfectly all right. Everyone can engage in theft and live off stolen loot if only he becomes a public official.
Welcome back to another episode of the No Way Jose podcast. Today is a sad, sad day. Today is the final reading of Democracy, the God That Failed by Hermann Hoppe. Today I'm joined by my good friend Toad. Man, it has probably been a long and arduous journey since we've started this. It would be interesting to look at the first one and see where we were at that point in time. We have come a long ways. We were just talking before this about what we will do next. I look forward to that, but here we are to put the final note in this book, highly recommend you guys go read it on your own if this is the only way you've experienced it, and maybe start reading like a dignified adult should. But with that, let's get Toad in here. What is up, my friend? How are you?
What's up, man?
Not much.
I'm all right. How are you?
Happy to have you here. It is sad. It's the last one. But yeah, I'm already excited about where we're gonna go. I think maybe we should just do regular readings to keep myself tight on my theory on the regular and tight with my boys. So
got to come up with a name for it, make a logo for it.
Yeah.
We're gonna call it Read-Tarded, I think is what the name of it is.
I think our buddy really Retarded on Twitter might be upset about that, but
he's read-hearted. Read-tarded.
Tomato, read-hearted, like, come on. But all right, with that, let's go ahead and get into it, bud. This will be a longer, probably, I'm going to go ahead and guess, probably a longer one. We were looking at it would have been odd to break up. We would have had one really long episode and one really short episode. Well, not one really long, one kind of long and one really short. So we're probably just gonna get one fairly long one today.
Yeah,
but it's the final. It's the grand finale. It's the big fireworks. It's where where we're reading on the impossibility of limited government, the prospect of revolution. That's the final chapter. Well, he's told us it's impossible, and we're priming for revolution. So that's where we are, the grand finale. Let's go ahead and start. I'll start the reading off.
Right.
Says
Well,
after.
say real quick, well, just because I always lead into it, I will say that the first section of this, or the first half of the chapter, or whatever we read, he was talking about what gives people a sense of national pride, and he was saying that the one thing that is inaccurate, that you should not derive a sense of pride from, is the Constitution, and that's what we're on. He's bashing the Constitution, essentially, so that's where we're at here.
Okay, so I was a little bit ahead of myself. We're not quite where he's demonstrated how it's impossible, although he kind of spent the rest of the book sort of doing that if you extrapolate. But,
Page 278, I believe, section 4, right, is where we're at. All right.
That is. All right, after more than 2 centuries of constitutionally limited government, the results are clear and incontrovertible. Jesus Christ. Incontrovertible. At the outset of the American experiment, the tax burden imposed on Americans was light, indeed almost negligible. Money consisted of fixed quantities of gold and silver. The definition of private property was clear and seemingly immutable, and the right to self-defense was regarded as sacrosanct. No standing army existed, and as expressed in Washington's farewell address, a firm commitment to free trade and a non-interventionist foreign policy appeared to be in place. 200 years later, matters have changed dramatically. Now, year in and year out, the American government expropriates more than 40% of the incomes of private producers, making even the economic burden imposed on slaves and serfs seem moderate in comparison. Gold and silver have been replaced by government-manufactured paper money, and Americans are being robbed continually through money inflation. The meaning of private property, once seemingly clear and fixed, has become obscure, flexible, and fluid. In fact, every detail of private life, property, trade, and contract is regulated and re-regulated by ever higher mountains of paper laws, legislation. And with increasing legislation, ever more legal uncertainty and moral hazards have been created, and lawlessness has replaced law and order. Last but not least, the commitment to free trade and non-interventionism has given way to a policy of protectionism, militarism, and imperialism. In fact, almost since its beginnings, the U.S. government has engaged in relentless, aggressive expansionism, and starting with the Spanish-American War and continuing past World War I and World War II to the present, the U.S. has become entangled in hundreds of foreign conflicts and risen to the rank of the world's most foremost warmonger and imperialist power. In addition, while American citizens have become increasingly more defenseless, insecure, and impoverished, and foreigners all over the globe have become ever more threatened and bullied by U.S. military power, American presidents, members of Congress, and Supreme Court judges have become ever more arrogant, morally corrupt, and dangerous. My, oh my, does that paragraph hit hard right now. I don't know if you agree, Toad, that it is a... Man, I mean, this book wasn't written that long ago. Was this like early 2000s or something? But
it was like around 2000. Yeah. It was like right before 9/11, basically. It was
something
25
like this.
years ago. Or
yeah. So I mean, I guess a little bit prophetic. Although I don't, don't need to be a prophet. You just need to be a theoretician that understands government.
Yeah. I mean, to me, that paragraph just kind of seemed like a long way of saying, well, the government grew a lot. Like, well, when we first. When the government was first created and under, the first president, Washington, whatever, people basically had the right to self-defense. Like, they basically believed in what the Constitution said. The government can't really infringe on that. Probably, I guess, most importantly out of all of this, I guess besides the right to self-defense, I guess, was the sound money. He was talking about how everything was hard money back then. And now, in a period of really not that long, like a couple hundred years, the government massively expanded to the point where the tax burden became way higher. Money is no longer sound. It's a fiat currency that's no longer backed by anything, so inflation is rampant. He's talking about how the government now is getting involved in all these wars where that wasn't the case before. And it was even, he did mention that like there was... no standing army back in like the Washington days either. And the founding fathers, like those guys were basically against foreign entanglements. Mm-hmm. But now the government is so big, we become this empire, and it's just like, yeah, fuck it. We're going to be involved in everybody's shit everywhere. That was that paragraph.
Mm-hmm. What can possibly be done about this state of affairs? First, the American Constitution must be recognized for what it is, an error. As the Declaration of Independence noted, government is supposed to protect life, property, and the pursuit of happiness. Yet, in granting government the power to tax and legislate without consent, the Constitution cannot possibly assure this goal, but is instead the very instrument for invading and destroying the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is absurd to believe that an agency which may tax without consent can be a property protector. Likewise, it is absurd to believe that an agency with legislative powers can preserve law and order. Rather, it must be recognized that the Constitution itself is the Constitution is itself unconstitutional, incompatible with the very doctrine of natural human rights that inspired the American Revolution. Indeed, no one in his right mind would agree to a contract that allows one's alleged protector to determine unilaterally, without one's consent and irrevocably, without the possibility of exit, how much to charge for protection. And no one in his right mind would agree to an irrevocable contract which granted one's alleged protector the right to ultimate decision-making regarding one's own person and property, i.e. of unilateral lawmaking.
Yeah. So he's kind of reiterating what he's said in this chapter repeatedly, basically, which is that the Constitution does set up a government, so it does set up like a monopoly of force. Like basically back then, I mean, everybody knew we need some way of protecting property. I mean, we understand what property rights are, but they set up this Constitution which gives that like right, I guess, to the government to protect property, which is hypocritical on its face because government taxes you by force. Like you can't get out of it. As he's pointing out here, nobody actually really signed a contract. It's the social contract thing.
It's a protector that's aggressing against you, essentially.
Right.
Like it's an oxymoron in a sense.
Right. Even though even in the Constitution, I think it was either the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence, it said that it was a government like for the people and by the people. So everybody just kind of, I think, bought into that, saying, oh, well, that means that we actually agree to this, which...
Yeah, it was a Spooner idea that like for some reason there became this magic... Well, because we do some weird bureaucratic process, consent, and he's like, no. And there's a good portion in Spooner's where he goes through and just like kind of goes line by line, like why? No, this is So anyways, it's your turn whenever you're ready to get on to the next part. By the way.
Yeah, but again, you have the government that's supposed to be protecting property, but it is a violator of property. So again, it's hypocritical, which he's pointed that out a bunch of times in this chapter. All right. Second, it is necessary to offer a positive and inspiring alternative to the present system. While it is important that the memory of America's past as a land of pioneers and an effective anarcho-capitalist system based on self-defense and popular militias be kept alive, we cannot return to the feudal past or the time of the American Revolution. Yet the situation is not hopeless. Despite the relentless growth of statism over the course of the past 2 centuries, economic development has continued and our living standards have reached spectacular new heights. Under these circumstances, a completely new option has become viable: the provision of law and order by freely competing private profit and loss insurance agencies. So, I mean... He's basically kind of getting into what he's about to talk about, private protection, which we already covered in the previous chapter as well, I believe. But yeah, he's basically saying that we need to remember like the values that this country was founded on, because it was about protecting private property. It was about at least minimal government. But then we've gotten so far away from that. Like he's even admitting that it's like impossible to get back to that.
Well, there's too much of a level of integration between systems to where like the idea that like we'd be able to, it's the idea of breaking off from a government. It's like there's so much civil infrastructure that's tied up in that. Whereas if you are talking about the Wild West type of mentality, that's the exact opposite. Yeah, maybe there's some case for roads or maybe some minor infrastructure things, but for the most part, in that type of environment, you're roughnecking it, and you're, for the most part, you're taking very, very little from the state or from some sort of civil infrastructure system. So essentially, he's proposing here we need some sort of civil infrastructure system. That doesn't mean, people see that and go, oh, we need a government. You go, no, that doesn't mean you need a government. That means you need roads. It means it's the what was it, de Tocqueville, I think maybe the quote about, it's like, or maybe it's somebody else, a Juvenal or somebody, the quote about like, that if people, you say you don't want the government to produce bread, and people then say, you don't want bread. So it's like, no, these things could be produced without a government. It's like there's this current argument going on right now about property taxes, because I believe Marjorie Taylor Greene tweeted something out about it. And it's like, well, some people be like, oh, well, so you want the taxes gone, but do you want the benefits that you get gone? And you're like, no, I just don't want them to be coming out of my paycheck. I mean, I just want the consumers of whatever given thing we're talking about here to be the people who use it. And I know people go, oh, well, that's a collectivized thing. And you're like, well, there are methods. Which I don't know. There's probably all sorts of theory books we could recommend on all the different. And we were talking about actually chaos, how and that would kind of address these sorts of concepts of like how things could work in the absence of a state. And it's like just because we can't imagine it doesn't mean it makes, because it's the idea. It's like, oh, you think you're an anarchist? Well, like, all right, well, tell me how everything would run.
The answer, as Bob Murphy points out in Chaos Theory, the answer is like we don't know, but I'm gonna like speculate as to how it might work, which is what Hoppe's kind of about to do here again with the private production of defense, basically, which is kind of the last hurdle that people have to get over, as far as like this is kind of like the last thing that people think the government like absolutely needs to do. Yeah. Like it needs to protect property, essentially.
Yeah, but who would build the roads? You know, exactly.
Right. Yeah. Right. Which I'm not even sure that like his solution here would actually work, just because I think the government would probably try to like fight back against it and be like, you can't do this. You can't have these like private protection firms, depending on what they are. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it could happen at like some small scales and stuff. But
I don't know. I think it looks like the current Tealite agents, might be pushing. That's the kind of what they've always pushed. But it's theirs is like a creepy, distorted version of it, though. So it's like but with governments.
Right. Well, we're seeing it we are seeing some examples of it in places like those military guys in Poland who are basically just like, fuck you, we're going to enforce our own borders. You see that going on there?
No, I haven't seen that, no.
Yeah, because Poland is basically not protecting its own borders, and there are all these, Middle Easterners fleeing the Middle East and coming in and, raping people and whatever in these European countries, and Poland is apparently sick of it, and they're like, they have these, jacked military guys who have formed this group to enforce the border themselves.
All right, yeah, I think I've heard something about that, yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty based. All right. While hampered by the state, even now, insurance agencies protect private property owners upon payment of a premium against a multitude of natural and social disasters, from floods and hurricanes to theft and fraud. Thus, it would seem that the production of security and protection is the very purpose of insurance. Moreover, people would not turn to just anyone for a service as essential as that of protection. Rather, as de Molinari noted, before striking a bargain with a producer of security, they will check if he is really strong enough to protect them, and whether his character is such that they will not have to worry about his instigating the very aggressions he is supposed to suppress. Yeah, so he's talking again about how he thinks private protection would work. He thinks it would be tied to insurance companies because the incentives would line up. Because insurance companies, they're going to cover you if you have damages, and they don't want to have to pay you out. So they're actually incentivized to have your property protected as well. And yeah, the de Molinari quote there is basically saying that if you have a free market environment, people are going to only choose people that they actually trust to protect their property.
Exactly. Yeah.
So the incentives would all line up nicely in that case. In this regard, insurance agencies also seem to fit the bill. They are big and in command of the resources, physical and human, necessary to accomplish the task of dealing with the danger, actual or imagined, of the real world. Indeed, insurers operate on a national or even international scale, and they own substantial property holdings dispersed over wide territories and beyond the borders of single states, and thus have a manifest self-interest in effective protection. Furthermore, all insurance companies are connected through a complex network of contractual agreements on mutual assistance and arbitration, as well as a system of international reinsurance agencies representing a combined economic power which dwarfs most, if not all, contemporary governments, and they have acquired this position because of their reputation as effective, reliable, and honest businesses. So, I mean,
I don't know how well this applies in the current situation.
Yeah,
Insurance has gotten a little bit squirrely in the past 25 years, but I do think he still has a point. But even then, that's a function of government intervention in the market is what's fucked. But I mean, if you look back, I remember. I mean, I don't know. Maybe growing up, I felt like the insurance system was personally. I mean, it felt to be way more manageable, way more. But as the government's creeped into it, it's gotten way more insufferable, at least in my opinion. Obviously, there's other factors like inflation and stuff. But once again, I guess that kind of comes back to the root problem, anyways.
Yeah, I think he's kind of making the point again that insurance agencies, they are big, so they actually have the resources to do this. They have the resources to maybe like connect with other agencies that might actually provide the actual like defense and protection or whatever. And I guess they would kind of network and talk about like maybe excluding certain people who shouldn't be insured anymore because those people are, criminals or trying to commit fraud or something like that. So he's mentioned all that. We've talked about that in the prior chapter mostly.
Well, we've gone to such a gig economy / like subcontracting economy now too, to where like that makes sense. That can like you can kind of understand that as well from that perspective of the idea of that like they've already kind of got these business deals and all these different agents that provide different services depending whether it's security or inquiring on values of certain assets or whatever. And so they already have these things in place, and it's already based on a network of a voluntary system.
Yeah. But like what you were saying, there are certain types of insurance that obviously the government has completely overtaken, like health insurance, where you have to have health insurance for things that aren't even emergencies. Like insurance is supposed to be disaster coverage. Obviously, health insurance does not work that way because you have to have it for a regular doctor visit, which is ridiculously stupid. That's like having to have like car insurance just for like an oil change or something like that. That's crazy. Like I don't think anybody would agree to that bullshit. Like so,
yeah.
But you do it for people.
I'm literally in a situation where I don't have healthcare. I do not have. I've literally crunched the numbers. It makes it for me. Literally speaking, like I guess sure I could have some mishap that like completely destroys me and like is like financially, but it's like I'm generally pretty healthy. I have a fairly clean bill of health. It's just like crunching the numbers, how much I have to pay per month, and it's like why? Like, and then also then it's like how much I don't even really hardly see any much savings from whatever insurance I usually get anyways. So it's like. And then all of the deductibles are usually out the ass. So it's like you just get a point where you're like, what am I paying for?
Yeah,
and that's the system we have right now.
Strokes and seizures. So
yeah, okay, you're a different situation, but just the idea that it's like it's more expensive than it's worth. Like it makes no sense. Like it's supposed to it should. I mean, don't get me wrong. You're going to pay out some money because it's a disaster. It's like an insurance thing, or that's what it is. But my point being is it has definitely degraded over time to where it's just like. It doesn't even really make sense. Like it's at the point to where you're like, oh no, then I might have to take into account. And a lot of times, say with disasters, even medical, you're able to like come up with deals and stuff like that with the hospitals. A lot of times, depending on what it is. So it's like we really are in this weird situation. For there are a lot of people where it's like it doesn't even make sense to have insurance.
Right. Although I think like other types of insurance, like home insurance, car insurance, kind of is less bastardized than that right now, and kind of still. Sort of makes sense and covers you, just in the event of unforeseen things happening and damages. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's been some shenanigans of the conspiracy world with some of the natural disaster stuff and insurances and home insurance and stuff. But for the most part, generally speaking, that actually makes way more sense. I've actually... I have far less complaints when it comes to my home insurance. They've actually come in handy multiple times. Like it's it makes sense. It's an it is. I have very little complaints. Obviously, I'd love it if they paid me out more, but it's like for the product I get, it's like it makes sense. If I have a disastrous issue with my home, yeah, and it's not complicated by all these other weird. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm sure there's lots of legal infractions in that market as well, but nowhere near health. But all right, we're rambling now. Let's keep going. That didn't even require any commentary at all, really.
No. While this may I feel like I always have to. While this may suffice to establish insurance agencies as a possible alternative to the role currently performed by states as providers of law and order, a more detailed examination is needed to demonstrate the principal superiority of such an alternative to the status quo. In order to do this, it is only necessary to recognize that insurance agencies can neither tax nor legislate. That is, the relationship between the insurer and the insured is consensual. Both are free to cooperate or not to cooperate, and this fact has momentous implications. In this regard, insurance agencies are categorically different from states. So, I mean, of course, as we just talked about, sometimes in some cases like health, you're kind of forced to have it almost. But
yeah,
I mean, there are some ways.
That was one point I meant to get at before. That was
but yeah.
Sorry to be a talk over you, but that was one point I was trying to dive at too. Is that like I'm pretty sure we get penalized now too? Isn't it literally you pay, I think it taxes. You get some sort of penalty at the end of the year if you don't have to. Or is that still a thing, or do they get rid of that?
I don't even know, man.
I mean, maybe they got rid of that. But
actually,
either way,
no, they got. I think that's the one thing they got rid of. Actually,
okay,
that's the individual mandate.
Okay, because I was going to say even then
Trump
on top of that, like it, I was going to use my example because like even then, furthermore, I'm literally being penalized, and that's the point to where it's like it doesn't make sense. Where I'm literally willing to pay to not have it.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's the only part of Obamacare that Trump got rid of, and that has remained that way. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. But Hoppe's basically saying, at least in his situation here, you would be voluntarily choosing your providers of insurance, your protection agencies, whatever, and that's what makes all the difference because you're not forced into it; it's voluntary. There's no NAP violation with that.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's keep moving, bud.
The advantages of having insurance agencies provide security and protection are as follows. First off, competition among insurers for paying clients will bring about a tendency toward a continuous fall in the price of product. Excuse me, I can't see it. There's a shadow on this. A continuous fall in the price of protection per insured value, thus rendering protection more affordable. In contrast, a monopolistic protector who may tax the protected will charge even higher prices for his services. Yeah, so he's already made that point. We know that in the voluntary situation, you're going to wind up paying less for that coverage than if you're forced to, because obviously if you're forced to, they can charge whatever you want, basically, because you don't have any say in that, pretty much. Mm-hmm. Second... Oh, wait.
It's my turn. My turn.
Yeah. Oh, shit. All right.
Second, insurers will have to indemnify their clients in the case of actual damage. Hence, they must operate efficiently. Regarding social disasters, crime in particular, this means that the insurer must be concerned above all with effective prevention. For unless he can prevent a crime, he will have to pay up. Further, if a criminal cannot be prevented, an insurer will still want to recover the loot, apprehend the offender, and bring him to justice, because in so doing, the insurer can reduce his costs and force the criminal, rather than the victim and his insurer, to pay for the damages and costs of indemnification. In distinct contrast, because compulsory monopolist states do not indemnify victims and because they can resort to taxation as a source of funding, they have little or no incentive to prevent crime or to recover loot and capture criminals. If they do manage to apprehend a victim, they typically force the victim to pay for the criminal's incarceration, thus adding insult to injury. Yeah. Which the last one people might get confused by the idea of like,
you mean?
Yeah, okay. Is that what I say? Yeah, if they do manage to apprehend a criminal, they typically force the victim to pay for the criminal's incarceration, thus adding insult to injury.
Right.
I don't know if I fucked that up, but it is. People might get confused by that line, but it is. I think people may not realize like what he's getting at. That is like literally the criminal justice system is like it comes out of like we literally pay for it through taxes. So. Right. Essentially, the victim pays for it. So, like in a certain sense, so it's like being extracted from everybody, but it's the idea that it's the person, in a sense, coming from people, as opposed to the focal point should be the party who aggrieved the other should be paying out. Like they're the one who wronged. I mean, don't get me wrong; they'll get paid out, but see how we've inserted this third person who essentially takes money from the victim. And then also takes money from the accused, and somehow they're the one with all the money. And like maybe you might make the person whole somewhat, sort of, but it clearly is a bit of a scam in that sense. So
right, and there was a really good point in that paragraph, probably one of the better points in this book, that the incentives would line up such that the insurance company would actually be incentivized to catch the criminal. Like say somebody steals something from you. The insurer, if they can't catch the guy, they're going to have to pay out of their own money. They're going to have to pay to make you whole again. But if they catch the guy and get the money back from him, then they don't have to do that. So they're actually incentivized to go catch the guy.
Which is kind of the point he's getting at. That's right. That was also a kind of a side point. The idea that like, hey, it comes out of the everyone else, whereas if it's coming out of initially the insurer, if they aren't able to sustain your money, it's like they have an incentive, like you said, to catch him. So. All right. Third, and most importantly, because the relationship between insurers and their client is voluntary, insurers must accept private property as an ultimate given and private property rights as an immutable law. That is, in order to attain or retain paying clients, insurers will have to offer contracts with specified property and property damage descriptions, rules of procedure, evidence, compensation, restitution, and punishment, as well as intra- and interagency conflict resolution and arbitration procedures. Moreover, out of the steady cooperation between different insurers in mutual interagency arbitration proceedings, a tendency toward the unification of law of a truly universal or international law will emerge. Everyone, by virtue of being insured, would thus become tied into a global competitive effort to minimize conflict and aggression, and every single conflict and damage claim, regardless of where and by or against whom, would fall into the jurisdiction of exactly one or more specific and innumerable insurance agencies and their contractually agreed to arbitration procedures, thereby creating perfect legal certainty. In striking contrast, as tax-funded monopoly protectors, states do not offer the consumers of protection anything even faintly resembling a service contract. Instead, they operate in a contractual void that allows them to make up and change the rules of the game as they go along. Most remarkably, whereas insurers must submit themselves to independent third-party arbitrators and arbitration proceedings in order to attract voluntarily paying clients, states, insofar as they allow for arbitration at all, assign this task to another state-funded and state-dependent judge.
Yeah. So, well, basically, yeah, he's saying that in the private scenario, you have multiple insurance companies that are, competing for people's business and whatever. They would essentially kind of all wind up having to provide a similar service. They would all wind up basically having to agree upon, like, yes, we are protecting your property. So essentially, the idea of property rights would be held, I guess, like due to that being the case. Like everybody would be basically you'd have that one common thing between all the insurance agencies, like, yes, we have to protect property. It would the incentives would just line up that way, so that it would sort of become a universal thing. But when the government is providing protection or whatever, they can just make up any rule that they want, and that is what they do. So you get this completely bastardized thing where you don't even really know what the rules even are, right? Like, what is even a property violation now? Mm-hmm. Whereas in the voluntary system, a property violation would basically be exactly what you think it is. Like, it kind of is an obvious thing. But with the government, you never know what they're even going to... as we can see right now, you have these Democrat-led cities that are basically just not even prosecuting theft at all at this point. Just no, you can go in and steal shit, whatever. Yeah. We're not even going to prosecute it. That would not happen in this private system that he is referring to.
Absolutely not. All right. On to you, buddy. 284.
Yes. Further implications of this fundamental contrast between insurers as contractual versus states as non-contractual providers of security deserve special attention. Because they are not subject to and bound by contracts, states typically outlaw the ownership of weapons by their clients, thus increasing their own security at the expense of rendering their alleged clients defenseless. In contrast, no voluntary buyer of protection insurance would agree to a contract that required him to surrender his right to self-defense and be unarmed or otherwise defenseless. To the contrary, insurance agencies would encourage the ownership of guns and other protective devices among their clients by means of selective price cuts, because the better the private protection of their clients, the lower the insurer's protection and indemnification costs will be.
I do like how he did lay it down, and this is almost an economic argument for why they're going to take your guns, because it's like they have, if you look at it, because if you apply what normal security would provide, a security, like an insurance system that we're talking about here, is if you are, essentially it's incentivized to have an armed populace, because essentially it prevents them from having to pay out any of these things, as opposed to the inverse, where we've gone into extensively how the government is not they're incentivized to essentially give you essentially for the least amount of work, get the most amount of money out of you and give you the most amount of the least amount of product. So if you recognize that incentive, then what other incentives are at play here? Well, the only incentive in play is their security. So they're fully incentivized to disarm you, and like just because it's like there's no other incentive. There's no incentive to make you safe, and if they're incentivized to just take more money for you, it also is easier if you're unarmed. So
right. Exactly. Well, yeah, they're continually taking from you, and if they're not going to actually provide security from you, you're probably going to want to defend yourself against them, so they're going to take your weapons away so that you don't do that. Whereas, as you said, and as he said, in the private system, which I think he's mentioned already again in the previous chapter, but he kind of laid it out better in this paragraph, insurers would actually want to incentivize you to actually have your own guns and protect your own property, because then they won't have to pay out. And he's saying that they might actually allow you to pay less for their insurance because, oh, you have guns here? That means that you're well protected, so you actually have to pay less for this insurance because you're less likely to actually suffer a property violation because you might just, be able to defend against it on your own.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So, yeah, he makes the economic argument for all of that there.
100%.
All right. Moreover, because they operate in a contractual void and are independent of voluntary payment, states arbitrarily define and redefine what is and what is not a punishable aggression and what does and does not require compensation. By imposing a proportional or progressive income tax and redistributing income from the rich to the poor, for instance, states in effect define the rich as aggressors and the poor as their victims. Otherwise, if the rich were not aggressors and the poor not their victims, how could taking something from the former and giving it to the latter be justified? Or by passing affirmative action laws, states effectively define whites and males as aggressors and blacks and women as their victims. For insurance agencies, any such business conduct would be impossible for two fundamental reasons. Do you want to just talk about that quickly? Because
yeah, I mean, I do think. I guess real quick, I guess we could mention that it's a. I guess it's kind of interesting concept he's kind of getting at here. I guess he's making the point that just simply the idea of like a proportional and progressive, essentially income tax, redistributing income, like just whatever tax scheme you got there, just that in and of itself, I guess, is kind of making the point, by implication, I guess you could say that one is the aggressor and one is the victim or something. Although I would say that maybe there's not might not be the right way to put it per se, but I get what he's meaning, and essentially that's kind of the impression it gives. I think that is what he's saying. Yeah. Which I mean, I think to say I don't know. I guess what I'm trying to say is that like I don't know. I guess I don't know what I'm trying to. That doesn't necessarily mean that, but I think what I'm saying is that it would imply that, and I think maybe he may not have said that. Maybe that's what he meant. Like that is something that the populace would interpret from that they would go, oh, well, you're telling me that I should get less and they should pay more. Well, doesn't that mean they're more bad? And they're clearly not paying. They need to pay more because somehow making more requires a. I guess you could did kind of break down by goods and bads before, so that is a bad. So yeah,
right. But that is kind of what people's thought is, right? With like we're talking about I can't think of the word right now because I have stroke brain again right now. What's the word of forcing white people to have to compensate for? He defined it as affirmative action, but you know what I'm talking about. White people have to compensate black people.
Buck breaking.
No, for slavery.
Yeah, buck breaking.
Oh my God! Why can't I think of the word right now?
I don't know.
Starts with an
white guilt. I don't know. Yeah, retarded. I don't know, man.
Everybody knows what I'm talking about, and I can't think of the fucking word.
Maybe I'll think of it later, but I can't think of it right now. But yeah, I guess. Yeah.
But that's that's always like a topic that comes up, and like literally people are taking that to mean, oh, the black people are the victims, so we need to give them the money from the white people. So like it is exactly what Hoppe just said there.
Okay, to be fair, he says in here, states in effect define the rich as aggressors. So the in effect is doing a lot of carrying, because I guess I missed that point. That's what I was getting at. Because I thought I read it as almost as he was saying, therefore, by this logic, they are aggressors. And I would say that actually isn't the therefore. Even by that logic train, that wouldn't necessarily mean. But I do get why it would, in effect, by the implication that the populace receives from that, is they would from there interpret like, well, you're saying I should pay less and they should pay more. Like I'm the victim and they're the one who should be taken from, essentially. So, I mean, pretty clear, fairly clear definition for most people. Like they're bad, take shit from them, whereas we're good. Don't take out stuff from us. But I guess we should probably move on. We're rambling again, but just
well,
it was an interesting concept, I thought.
Yeah, he is saying the states are redefining what is aggression, which I said, when we talked about one of the prior paragraphs there. So,
I mean, I guess in a sense they are saying that this person deserves more aggression against them. So I mean, like you would say, well, I mean, what would you think of that? That would mean like, hey, they've done something to merit more aggression, right? So yeah.
Yep. All right, so we're talking about why within private insurance agencies doing this would be impossible for multiple reasons. First, every insurance involves the pooling of particular risks into risk classes. It implies that to some of the insured, more will be paid out than what they paid in, and to others, less. However, and this is decisive, no one knows in advance who the winners and who the losers will be. Winners and losers and any income redistribution among them will be randomly distributed. Otherwise, if winners and losers could be systematically predicted, losers would not want to pool their risk with winners, but only with other losers because this would lower their insurance premium. So, yeah, basically he's saying that the government, when the government has control of all this, they, as we just talked about, they define who the winners and losers are. Like, we are going to take from the rich and give to the poor, whatever. With an insurance pooling here, people are going to pool their money into this one pool, and you don't really know who's going to get paid out because it's going to be like whether a disaster happens to this particular person or not, you don't really know. It's kind of unpredictable, although I think it's not totally unpredictable. He's kind of making it seem like it's totally unpredictable, but of course, he's already talked about this himself, like when he did the private property chapter. Like, if you live in like a high crime area, you're obviously going to have to pay more for your insurance, you know what I mean?
But generally speaking, it's somewhat unpredictable.
It's unpredictable within that particular risk pool. Like, if all those people have the same risk, and they're all paying in the same amount, it's unpredictable which specific one of those people is going to have to get paid out. Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Second, it is not possible to insure oneself against any conceivable risk. Rather, it is only possible to insure oneself against accidents, i.e. risks over whose outcome the insured has no control whatsoever and to which he contributes nothing. Thus, it is possible to insure oneself against the risk of death or fire, for instance, but it is not possible to insure oneself against the risk of committing suicide or setting one's own house on fire. Similarly, it is impossible to insure oneself against the risk of business failure, of unemployment, of not becoming rich, of not feeling like getting up and out of bed in the morning, or of disliking one's neighbors, fellows, or superiors, because in each of these cases, one has either full or partial control over the event in question. That is, an individual can affect the likelihood of the risk. By their very nature, the avoidance of risks such as these falls into the realm of individual responsibility, and any agency that undertook their insurance would be slated for immediate bankruptcy. Most significantly, for the subject under discussion, the uninsurability of individual actions and sentiments, in contradistinction to accidents, implies that it is also impossible to insure oneself against the risk of damages which are the result of one's prior aggression or provocation. Rather, every insurer must restrict the actions of its clients so as to exclude all aggression and provocation on their part. That is, any insurance against social disasters such as crime must be contingent on the insured submitting themselves to specified norms of non-aggressive, civilized conduct.
I mean, that last sentence kind of says it all. It's just that last paragraph is just the idea that essentially incentivizes you. They have every reason for you not to want you to instigate problems to cause them to pay more shit. Like the idea of the suicide thing. Like, obviously they're not going to insure you against suicide because it's like that is something that you can cause. So yes, and with that, that rate in of itself is an example of what we're talking about here. This is them enforcing certain behaviors. Like, you cannot act in this aggressive manner. I guess it's aggressive against oneself, but you also are not allowed to be like, it would any person that would cover your health expenses or property loss from like muggings or whatever. I'm sure they probably would maybe even say in it that like. Hell, they may even say something of like, don't if we find that you were in some way, unnecessarily escalating the conflict or something, like even it's something like a mugging, like if you're behaving in an odd way and aren't just like, oh, here's the shit, okay. Mm-hmm. Like if you're on camera acting behave like crazy and be like, let's fucking fight, let's go. They'd be like, why'd you do that? Like just even simple shit as that. They might be like, well, maybe we'll only partially cover it or whatever. I mean, there's all sorts of different options that they could have there, but they have every reason to incentivize you to not want to escalate conflicts or to cause conflicts.
Right. And yeah, I mean, he's already made the point that obviously they can't insure you over things that you have control over. Like if you burn your house down, that's, insurance fraud essentially. So, I mean, that's the case now, even with the system we have now. But the more important point here, what you were just talking about at the very end of that paragraph, I think very solid point here is that, you would be incentivized to behave in a civilized way because if you provoke somebody else, that means you're more likely to have your property damaged by that person that you provoked. You know what I mean? Like if you go to your neighbor and, you provoke them in some way by taking something from them, they're going to be more incentivized to come over and take something from you and retaliate. So that's why the insurance agencies would be like, well, you can't do that because we're insuring your property and you're putting your own property at risk by doing that. So that's basically what he's saying there. So the incentives, again, would line up properly there and allow people, it would basically enforce like more civilized behavior.
Mm-hmm. Accordingly, while states as monopolistic protectors can engage in redistributive properties benefiting one group of people at the expense of another, and while as tax-supported agencies they can even insure uninsurable risks and protect provocateurs and aggressors, voluntarily funded insurers would be systematically prevented from doing any such thing. Competition among insurers would preclude any form of income and wealth redistribution among various groups of insured, for a company engaging in such practices would lose clients to others refraining from them. Rather, every client would pay exclusively for his own risk, respectively that of people with the same homogeneous risk exposure as he faces. Nor would voluntarily funded insurers be able to protect any person from the consequences of his own erroneous, foolish, risky, or aggressive conduct or sentiment. Competition between insurers would instead systematically encourage individual responsibility, and any known provocateur and aggressor would be excluded as a bad insurance risk from any insurance coverage whatsoever, and be rendered an economically isolated, weak, and vulnerable outcast. So if you're one of those youths out there, good luck getting covered. Life's going to be a lot hard. You will be isolated, weak, and a vulnerable outcast.
Right. If you're like constantly provoking, neighbors, whatever, and basically again incentivizing them to maybe come over and damage
blasting your boombox in the mall, like you're driving your
it.
Impala on the side of the road to get around traffic,
Right. Insurance agencies would be incentivized to just not cover you anymore. And then he made the point again that this is a voluntary agreement, so the insurance agencies obviously are not going to be able to tax you or take the money that they have and redistribute. Or if they did, say they did have a pool and they were doing something illegal with that money or whatever, and whatever they're doing with it, and giving that money to somebody they shouldn't be giving it to or whatever, there'd probably be some sort of legal recourse for that because they're basically committing theft. So it would be, that would be the way that everything would be set up.
Mm-hmm. Finally, with regard to foreign relations, because states can externalize the cost of their own actions onto hapless taxpayers, they are permanently prone to becoming aggressors and warmongers. Accordingly, they tend to fund and develop weapons of aggression and mass destruction. In distinct contrast, insurers will be prevented from engaging in any form of external aggression because any aggression is costly and requires higher insurance premiums, implying the loss of clients to other non-aggressive competitors. Insurers will engage exclusively in defensive violence, and instead of acquiring weapons of aggression and mass destruction, they will tend to invest in the development of weapons of defense and of targeted retaliation. So kind of getting at the idea of under this magical system, we wouldn't have these things like, we might still have them, but it wouldn't be incentivized a wide proliferation of things like nuclear weapons, for example, because it's like, what's the point of that? Well, that would be an insurer's worst fucking nightmare.
Well, they wouldn't be going to war with each other because they're not really even incentivized to do so. They're basically disincentivized to do so because they're all in the protection market anyway, and they're all going to be able to defend themselves against each other. It just makes no sense. Like why you're basically just like the individual is going to be incentivized to not provoke another individual. The insurance agencies are going to be incentivized to not provoke each other as well for a similar reason, because they'd be putting themselves at risk. So I'm pretty sure that's what he's saying. Whereas obviously when the state has control over all this protection, they just develop massive amounts of weapons and they go to war with them. And that's, they're incentivized to do that. So the incentives work in the opposite way.
Even though we're on to part 5 of this, the final part here. Even though all of this is clear, how can we ever succeed in implementing such a fundamental constitutional reform? Insurance agencies are presently restricted by countless regulations which prevent them from doing what they could and naturally would do. How can they be freed from these regulations? Essentially, the answer to this question is the same as that given by the American revolutionaries more than 200 years ago, through the creation of free territories and by means of secession. Yep, I guess not really any commentary to be had yet. In fact, today, under democratic conditions, this answer is even truer than it was in the days of kings. For then, under monarchical conditions, the advocates of an anti-statist, liberal, libertarian social revolution still had an option that has since been lost. Liberals/libertarians in the old days could, and frequently did, believe in the possibility of simply converting the king to their view, thereby initiating a revolution from the top. No mass support was necessary for this, just the insight of an enlightened prince. However realistic this might have been then, today this top-down strategy of social revolution would be impossible. Not only are political leaders selected nowadays according to their demagogic talents and proven record as habitual immoralists, as been explained above, consequently the chance of converting them to liberal/libertarian views must be considered even lower than that of converting a king who simply inherited his position. Now, I always feel the need to say this because I feel it makes me feel icky. He means liberal in a different way, not in the way you think. Moreover, the state's protection monopoly is now considered public rather than private property, and government rule is no longer tied to a particular individual, but to specified functions exercised by anonymous functionaries. Hence, the one or few men conversion strategy can no longer work. It does not matter if one converts a few top government officials, the president, and some leading senators or judges, for instance, because within the rules of democratic government, no single individual has the power to abdicate the government's monopoly of protection. Kings had this power, but presidents do not. The president can resign from this position, of course, only to have it taken over by someone else. He cannot dissolve the governmental protection monopoly because according to the rules of democracy, the people, not their elected representatives, are considered the owners of government. Once again, prescient discussion at this given time. No one's coming to fucking save you. It doesn't matter who you elect in there. You can fucking put Ron Paul in the Oval Office, and you're probably either going to get the bureaucratic, Leviathan that stops in every turn, or they take him on an old ride in Dallas, something along those lines. The state, you changing a few people at the top and trying to expect some anything other than them likely corrupting the message of whatever you're trying to do is generally speaking pretty foolhardy. I don't know how many times it can be proven over and over and over again. Fell for it again. Fell for it again. Fell for it again. Fell for it again. We are seeing it in real time. They're not your heroes. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how many times this happens to happen.
Well, yeah.
It's getting more and more ridiculous each subsequent time. Now we're at the point to where I don't know. I genuinely think our president is probably a pedophile. So that's where we're at now.
He probably is. This is a great paragraph, though, for a bunch of different reasons, because he does compare and contrast democracy to monarchy again. And he's saying that in a monarchy, it is maybe possible to change the ruler's mind on certain things, because you only have to change one guy's mind and make him, maybe you'd be able to get him to be more like benevolent that way. So whereas with the democracy, it's the rule of the people. So you kind of have to change the point of view of almost the entire voter base to really change anything, right? Which is impossible. You can't do that. Statism is rampant. You need to change so many people's minds that it's almost impossible to do that. And you mentioned Ron Paul. Of course, Ron Paul has been in Congress. We have Thomas Massey in there right now. MTG is pretty good right now. But even if you have those people, they're extremely rare, and then they basically get kind of blackballed by the rest of the government and whatever. So they're able to, kind of put their message out there, but they can't really hold really any sort of actual power, you know what I mean? And then if somebody did get into a position of power like that, like you mentioned with JFK, if they go against the deep state's wishes, basically, the people who are actually in power, like the CIA, I think JFK went up against the CIA and probably was not doing what they wanted as far as pushing, the Cold War shit. I think that's why he got taken out. And then
CIA and the Mossad.
Right. And then now I think, I do kind of think that Trump possibly wanted to do more good things than he has done, and that some of it has been that he's just not being allowed to.
But the old fucking the kids got in the way. You can't be fucking kids and trying to change bureaucratic processes. Once they like come on, like I'm gonna change the world. Like Donnie, you fucked kids. You're like you got me.
Yeah, but I think even if you had somebody, even at the level of the presidency, I think they wouldn't even be able to. Get a whole lot done, even if they kind of had the same views.
Yeah,
because
one way or the other, they get you.
They basically have a gun pointed at your head, either literal or metaphorical, and you wouldn't be allowed to. Yeah.
All right, it's your turn, buddy.
All right. Thus, rather than by means of a top-down reform, under the current conditions, one's strategy must be one of a bottom-up revolution. At first, the realization of this insight would seem to make the task of a liberal libertarian social revolution impossible. For does this not imply that one would have to persuade a majority of the public to vote for the abolition of democracy and an end to all taxes and legislation? And is this not sheer fantasy, given that the masses are always dull and indolent? And even more so, given that democracy, as explained above, promotes moral and intellectual degeneration, how in the world can anyone expect that a majority of an increasingly degenerate people accustomed to the right to vote should ever voluntarily renounce the opportunity of looting other people's property? Put this way, one must admit that the prospect of a social revolution must indeed be regarded as virtually nil. Rather, it is only on second thought, upon regarding secession as an integral part of any bottom-up strategy, that the task of a liberal libertarian revolution appears less than impossible, even if it still remains a daunting one. Yeah, so, that's a good paragraph there, too, because he is pointing out, I have been saying what I do always say, that you're not going to be able to change the entire voter base's minds. You're not going to be able to accomplish any sort of revolution that way, which should be what he's talking about as more of like a top-down approach.
Yeah.
That can't work. And I'm even thinking about, because people are accustomed to the right to vote. You even get pushback now. I make a lot of jokes about we're going to repeal the 19th, even though I'm serious about it, because I think women have accelerated the growth of government quite a bit, because that's what they tend to vote for. And I get so much backlash. They've displayed that
they don't deserve it. They don't deserve it.
Yeah. I get so much backlash from women whenever I point that out. I'm like, are you fucking serious?
Yeah. It's it's as simple as okay. It really is as simple as okay, well, let's just look at the stats that women vote. Do you agree with this? And especially because they're usually going to be arguing. Unless you're arguing with some super liberals, you agree with this voting record? Because it's really as simple as that. It's a functional thing. Everyone has this stupid idea of I have the right to vote.
Right, and you don't have that right. You don't have the right to vote on how other people are ruled over basically. But Hoppe, now he's about to say, well, the top-down approach we know is not possible, which I agree with him on that. So he's saying that if there is any prospect, even though he's still saying it would be a difficult thing to accomplish, we want a bottom-up approach.
Well,
which
he's
means
about to give a third position, buddy.
Is he? I thought he was about to talk about secession, which is bottom-up.
Yeah, well, I guess it is bottom-up in a sense. But even then, it's sort of a third position, because he's not. It's secession, but it's not in the. He's talking about a bottom down. Or bottom up, he was kind of making the point, it's sort of not, but he's talking about, I think, a grand overall, but you might be able to get as part to segment off. But anyways, let's get into it. Let's keep going, because, he's going to get into that.
How does secession fit into a bottom-up strategy of social revolution? More importantly, how can a secessionist movement escape the Southern Confederacy's fate of being crushed by a tyrannical and dangerously armed central government? I love that, how he just shouts out the Confederacy there, basically saying the Union was tyrannical and crushed their secession movement, which is absolutely correct, absolutely true. And of course, you get lied to and told that everything, all it was slavery. Confederacy bad, Union good. That's all you get told, but that's not the truth at all. It was a secessionist movement. It probably would have been better off if it had happened. Break up the Union to some extent here. All right. I just like how he shouts that out.
Thank God I'm already demonetized, because that's what got me last time, the Civil War.
Seriously? Oh, shit.
Yeah, I've told you it was.
Oh, you said it was Booth, yeah.
Well, I was talking about, well, not even, but even that, I was talking about Booth, but it really wasn't like, I know I said I was talking about Booth, but it wasn't as like, because you would assume like I said something crazy because I'm talking about Booth, because he killed Lincoln. No, I really didn't. All I said was, I think what I said was that somewhere, the paraphrase was something along the lines of like, maybe history isn't exactly like the way we were told in like school, essentially. Like maybe it's not as simple as the South bad, North good, the Lincoln devil or Lincoln angel, Booth devil. Like I think that's the way. That's like, so even when I was mentioning Booth, it wasn't even like
Jefferson Davis was the president of the Confederacy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But yeah. All right. Let's keep it moving. Yeah.
Yeah. In response to these questions, it is first necessary to remember that neither the original American Revolution nor the American Constitution were the result of the will of the majority of the population. A third of the American colonists were actually Tories, and another third was occupied with daily routines and did not care either way. No more than a third of the colonists were actually committed to and supportive of the revolution, yet they carried the day. And as far as the Constitution is concerned, the overwhelming majority of the American public was opposed to its adoption, and its ratification represented more of a coup d'etat by a tiny minority than the general will. All revolutions, whether good or bad, are started by minorities, and the secessionist route towards social revolution, which necessarily involves the breaking away of a smaller number of people from a larger one, takes explicit cognizance of this important fact. So
I guess it's not necessarily a third position. He's saying that this is the second position. This is
right.
It is a binary. It's top down or bottom up. And he's saying with the bottom up, this is kind of the only way it presents itself, good or bad. It's always a minority that takes the fore and then leads the way.
Right. And I like how he kind of contrasts the two a little bit, where both of these revolutions that he's talking about were led by the minority. The good one being the American Revolution, which was seceding from the English king. So he's saying that one was good. They were able to break away from that government that they didn't want to be a part of, form their own thing. Like, that's good. And he's basically going to say, I think that we should do that again here at some low level, break away from the federal government. And that's kind of the only way to get some sort of liberty in this, day and age, even back when he wrote this book. But I like how he contrasted that to the Constitution. He was saying the Constitution was also a revolution led by a minority, but that was actually a bad one. Because as we've pointed out, as we've talked about during this series, it was a coup of the Articles of Confederation, which set up a much less powerful federal government. I think maybe even not even a federal government at all, or very little of one. But the Articles of Confederation were couped to create the Constitution, which created a stronger federal government than what the Articles of Confederation were set up. So
fucking
he points
Hamilton.
out that was done by the what?
It's a fucking Hamilton.
Yeah, fuck Hamilton. That was done by the minority as well, and that was an example of a bad revolution. All right. Second, it is necessary to recognize that the ultimate power of every government, whether of kings or caretakers, rests solely on opinion and not on physical force. The agents of government are never more than a small proportion of the total population under their control. This implies that no government can possibly enforce its will upon the entire population unless it finds widespread support and voluntary cooperation within the non-governmental public. It implies, likewise, that every government can be brought down by a mere change in public opinion, i.e., by the withdrawal of the public's consent and cooperation. And while it is undeniably true that after more than 2 centuries of democracy, the American public has become so degenerate, morally and intellectually, that any such withdrawal must be considered impossible on a nationwide scale, it would not seem insurmountably difficult to win a secessionist-minded majority in sufficiently small districts or regions of the country. In fact, given an energetic minority of intellectual elites inspired by the vision of a free society in which law and order is provided by competitive insurers, and given furthermore that certainly in the U.S., which owes its very existence to a secessionist act, secession is still held to be legitimate and in accordance with the original democratic ideal of self-determination rather than majority rule by a substantial number of people, there seems to be nothing unrealistic about assuming that such secessionist majorities exist or can be created at hundreds of locations all over the country. In fact, under the rather realistic assumption that the U.S. central government, as well as the social democratic states of the West in general, are bound for economic bankruptcy, much like the social people's democracies of the East collapsed economically some 10 years ago. Present tendencies toward political disintegration will likely be strengthened in the future. Accordingly, the number of potential secessionist regions will continue to rise even beyond its current level.
Yeah, I do think we're on that trend. I think there have been more areas that are more open to the idea. Weren't we just recently dealing with some California struggles with this or something? I thought there was something about that recently.
North versus South in California, they have differences of opinion, different ideas and whatever. So he's basically saying that even though you're not going to win over, the majority of the public's minds, and that basically he is saying that the government derives its legitimacy from the public, and that the public still outweighs, the ruled class still has numbers over the ruling class, right? But the problem is that so many of them buy into the legitimacy of the government. There's not a whole lot that you can do. But he's saying, well, okay, we know that that's the case, but let's set up secessionist movements instead, where you can get different locations in the country where you can get like-minded people that actually believe in this, that say, well, we still believe in this, even though I think that, unfortunately, we've all been taught, like we just said, we all get taught that secession is bad, even though the American Revolution was a secessionist movement. They won't tell you that in school. They'll basically just say that it was the Confederacy, it was slavery, so secession bad, because they don't want people to do that. But I think that Hoppe is right that there is still that kind of rebellion, mindset in a lot of people still. And if government does get too extreme, I do think there are going to be a decent amount of people in certain places that you can set up something where people will secede or will want to do that. And I think we might be seeing it happen in New Hampshire right now.
Oh, really? Okay. Shit.
Well, it seems like it's kind of trending that way. I think they've actually kind of tried to introduce secession bills in their state legislature now, because the Free State Project they're doing their thing in New Hampshire, man. That's why they did this in New Hampshire, because it's a small state, small population. If you can get a decent percentage of people in there, and they're doing it mostly through the Republican Party. They're getting Liberty Republicans into office in the state legislature or whatever that will kind of vote their way. So they've made some movement in that direction, at least.
Well, essentially showing your populace that it's basically functionally allowed for elites and Israelis to fuck American children. At a certain point, I don't know when we stop putting up with this. Also, while in the backdrop, we're also funding a genocide that's literally about to reach probably even worse, even more dramatic horror levels with what they're getting. I guess they've already commenced their offensive on Gaza City, which I believe half the people are at now, which is that then therefore going to drive them to the south, to which then we have the problem all over again. So it's just kind of progressively getting more and more worse. We keep thinking we're at a worse level, but it's no, it's going to get darker and darker and darker the longest this goes on. They're planning on staying in Gaza City for a year. That's already the military plans. Planning on staying there for a year until the place is completely demolished. So yeah. That was a little bit of a tangent. I forgot what those even had to do with anything.
I don't know.
But they're tied into something here. Yeah.
What?
The idea of driving someone. I remember what we were talking about. The idea of driving people towards the idea of secession. I don't know, what point does the mind break that this is what you're doing? I'm a human being. I don't the idea,
evils of government. Yeah,
just evil. Not even the evils, just evil.
Yeah,
just that you're going to steal money from me. You're going to allow people to defile our children. You're going to, take our money to go violently murder other children abroad in the most depraved manners possible. It's it's just evil. And at a certain point, it's people just say, "Fuck you, I'm not having it." And
that's what you're getting at. I thought you were getting at, because I think in a way, Gaza is essentially sort of trying to secede from being ruled by Israel, right? And Israel is sort of like the Union, and they're just crushing that.
Yeah, it's kind of. Israel would debate.
That's an oversimplification.
Israel would debate. They'd be like, "Well, we're not ruling them."
Well, I'm not. I'm not going to buy whatever Israel is saying. Yeah.
Exactly, they are though. All right, let's keep it moving. Finally, the insight
here, man.
Yeah, I know, right? We're gonna cry. Finally, the insight into the widespread and growing secessionist potential also permits an answer to the last question regarding the dangers of a central government crackdown.
Danger.
While it is important in this regard that the memory of the secessionist past of the U.S. be kept alive, it is even more important for the success of a liberal libertarian revolution to avoid the mistakes of the second failed attempt at secession. Fortunately, the issue of slavery, which complicated and obscured the situation in 1861, has been resolved. However, another important lesson must be learned by comparing the failed second American experiment with secession to the successful first one. The first American secession was facilitated significantly by the fact that the center of power in Britain, public opinion concerning the secessionists was hardly unified. In fact, many prominent British figures such as Edmund Burke and Adam Smith, for instance, openly sympathized with the secessionists. Apart from purely ideological reasons, which rarely affect more than a handful of philosophical minds, this lack of a unified opposition to the American secessionists in British public opinion can be attributed to two complementary factors. On the one hand, a multitude of regional, cultural, religious affiliations, as well as of personal and family ties between Britain and the American colonists existed. On the other hand, the American events were considered far from home, and the potential loss of the colonies was economically insignificant. In both regards, the situation in 1861 was distinctly different. To be sure, the center of political power, which had shifted to the northern states of the U.S. by then, opposition to the secessionist Southern Confederacy was not unified, and the Confederate cause also had supporters in the North. However, fewer cultural bonds and kinship ties existed between the American North and South than had existed between Britain and the American colonists. And the secession of the Southern Confederacy involved about half the territory and a third of the entire population of the U.S., and thus struck Northerners as close to home and as a significant economic loss. Therefore, it was comparatively easy for the Northern power elite to mold the unified front of progressive Yankee culture versus a culturally backward and reactionary Dixieland.
Yeah, so he's talking about the two different secessionist movements, the difference between them, the Revolution versus the Civil War, which he is saying the Civil War, slavery complicated, and it was able to, that allowed like the Union to basically propagandize people, and we get propagandized now about it, of course, again, saying that it was all about slavery, and that if you're on the side of the South, you're pro-slavery and therefore bad. That didn't exist for the Revolution, obviously, but he was saying I think the Revolution was easier. I think a lot of it did have to do with the fact that it was across an ocean, so I think Britain was probably just like, yeah, I don't know, man. There was probably not a ton of public support for it in Britain, I would imagine. Mm-hmm. And as he said, like there were like some family ties there because you were fewer generations removed.
That's true.
From it, right? So I think it's kind of what he's saying there. Like some of these people like had come over from Britain, like not that long before that.
So they still have a lot of nostalgia of home still, somewhat. Whereas there was a separation between the other.
They were all white, so they were all the same. Yeah, whereas I guess the North and South had a lot of like cultural differences, I guess, at that point, and it was easier to propagandize people at that point too, with a larger government at that point too. So,
in light of these considerations, then it appears strategically advisable not to attempt again what in 1861 failed so painfully. For contiguous states or even the entire South trying to break away from the tyranny of Washington, D.C., rather, a modern liberal libertarian strategy of secession should take its cues from the European Middle Ages when, from until the 12th until well into the 17th century with the emergence of the modern central state, Europe was characterized by the existence of hundreds of free and independent cities interspersed into a predominantly feudal social structure. By choosing this model and striving to create a U.S. punctuated by large and an increasing number of territorial disconnected free cities, a multitude of Hong Kongs, Singapores, Monacos, and Liechtensteins strewn out over the entire continent, two otherwise unattainable but central objectives can be accomplished. First, besides recognizing the fact that the liberal libertarian potential is distributed highly unevenly across the country, such a strategy of piecemeal withdrawal renders secession less threatening politically, socially, and economically. Second, by pursuing the strategy simultaneously at a great number of locations all over the country, it becomes exceedingly difficult for the central state to create a unified opposition in public opinion to the secessionists, which would secure the level of popular support and voluntary cooperation necessary for a successful crackdown.
Yeah, that was what is it, 10,000 Liechtensteins or whatever. Yeah. He's saying that the secessionist movement that would be more successful would look I like how he harkened back to the Middle Ages, because people think of that as like a dark time, but I think what we're told about the Middle Ages I think is wrong as well. So he's saying that it would be best if you had a bunch of like smaller states.
Even saying 10,000 Liechtenstein's a bit of misnomer, because I think one point he's even driving at here is that you could almost say 10,000 Liechtensteins, Monacos, Hong Kong. The idea of these various different ones, and the idea, kind of what they were driving at before in the previous paragraph about how they were able to create this division between the two sides. If you why I kind of made this point of it's like even saying 1,000 Liechtensteins maybe a misunderstanding, because if you had 1,000 Liechtensteins, then you could create this unifying factor of us versus them, of Liechtensteinians versus whatever the other thing is. So if these are different things, and you're like, no, we're talking about 1,000, little town in Montana, little town in Tennessee, little town in cultures, So it's like now you can't find a unifying thing about them. You can't be like, well, all these blacks, all these stupid hicks, all these. Like, there is no unifying thing here. These are just people that are saying, fuck you. That's the only unifying thing here. That's it.
Right. Like, how do you drum up support against, all these people that might have all different cultures and whatever? So he's saying that might be the most successful way to have a secession. I will say, I mean, I know we have one small paragraph left, but I think we did see during the COVID shit, we did see sort of a soft secession where we saw a lot of people move away from the lockdown states and into the freer states, which was good. So that could be maybe a possible solution as well. Just have, better governments at the state level in various places as well. But of course, we want to go further than that because we want to detach ourselves from the federal government. But that was at least some, movement in the right direction, basically, the COVID migration.
All right, final paragraph. If and only if we succeed in this endeavor, if we then proceed to return all public property into appropriate private hands and adopt a new constitution which declares all taxation and legislation henceforth unlawful, and if we then finally allow insurance agencies to do what they are destined to do, can we truly be proud again, and will America be justified in claiming to provide an example to the rest of the world? And congrats! If you've watched this whole series, you are now one of these people who can say, I'm a big smarty pants, and I have read Democracy, the God That Failed. That's what you could do. You have read a book. Congrats, sort of. I mean, you had me read to it, but you can lie and tell your friends you read a book. You got commentary too. You even got more than just reading the book. So
and retardation. And
yes. So
talks about pedophiles.
Expect more. I think you'll be seeing more of these from me and Toad. But Toad, I guess I don't know. Do you have anything else you want to say? I guess before we go. I mean, we're done. We're done.
I was going to shout out Hans Hermann Hoppe because there is some.
Oh
news.
Yeah. What's the news?
There is some news that Hoppe and Guido Holzmann and I think a couple other guys who were part of the Mises Institute of Germany all said fuck you basically and left the Mises Institute because the Mises Institute is incessantly supporting Javier Milei, who is a flaming Zionist. So Hoppe and Holzmann and whoever these other guys were left the Mises Institute over it because they're basically saying you cannot prop up this guy who is not actually a libertarian and is not an example of libertarianism. You can go find articles about and how all the economic stuff that is being talked about in Argentina, a lot of that is false as well. And
I mean, people give him outs because I know there was a lot of the stuff about the BRIC stuff and and I think he initially ran to I know basically the petrodollar essentially. He seems to be clicked in with the. Which people will give governments, give them some leeway because it's like, hey, what are you going to do? But it's like, yeah, but you're the one running on I'm a Hoppian, basically.
Right. I think part of it is because he's labeling himself that, but he's obviously horrendous on foreign policy. He's a massive Zionist. He's definitely he's an Israel shill, man. So he is not one of us.
Weird. Yeah, because man, what's going on over there these days? I don't know. I'm not trying to cast any aspersions. I don't want to cause any. Not that I guess any of those guys would watch this show, but I don't know what's going on over there. That's weird. All right.
Yeah, and happy birthday to Ron Paul, by the way. It's his 90th birthday, I believe, today.
Yeah, I believe wasn't that yesterday or was it today? No, I think it was today.
I think it's the 20th.
Yeah, well, happy birthday, Ron Paul. This isn't going out then, but I guess for the patrons, they know what's up.
But we're recording it, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess, Toad, we'll do another soon. Let people know where they can find you at. Give whatever plugs you want. And I think you're still looking for employment. So, hey, any tech people out there, you want a beautiful a beautiful little dwarf that can clickety clack away just like you need him to on his little keyboard, whatever it is
software,
they do.
Man, I think I'm not
whatever
like,
that is.
I'm not one of those dumb IT people. I actually think and I write code, but we're getting eliminated by AI, so that is a problem.
Well, you should learn to code.
Learn to code. Great.
That is
segue.
funny. That was the thing. Learn to code, and coding is what getting replaced by AI.
Yeah.
So isn't that such a beautiful irony that the whole learn to code thing, and it's like come full circle. It's like, oh yeah, learn to code. You're like, yeah, well they made AI, you dumb bitch.
It's so bad. It is so bad. Everything's changing. We'll figure something out. I'm Learn to Toad on Twitter. Learn to Toad on Instagram. Where I put
learn to Toad. There you go. Yeah.
You didn't get that joke.
I get it now. I mean, I guess I sort of got it before, but it clicked now since we were doing Learn to Code.
Because I'm a coder. It's a reference to the Learn to Code thing as well. Yeah,
you got fired from your coding job, so what are you going to do? You're going to learn to Toad.
Learn to Toad instead of code. Learn to Toad on Twitter. Learn to Toad on Instagram, where I put out like short form betting content. Where I give out those plays as well on the full Better Off Dead show, BETTOR, which is my suicidal betting show that's on YouTube. I'm doing it every single morning there, and then I put it out on the audio platforms as well, Apple, Spotify, whatever. And I have a ukulele channel on YouTube covered in uke, so you can check that out as well for that content. And there's a Patreon, patreon.com/learntotode, where you can get some bonus uke content right now at some of the levels.
Well, hey, yeah. For those who want to support what I'm doing over here, and if you don't want to chip any money, you can leave a like, a share, subscribe, comment, leave a 5-star review on iTunes or Spotify. All of those things go a long way to help this show grow. But you can go even further if you'd like to chip in $1. That's the best way you can support the show over at patreon.com/nowayjose2020. The lowest level is $2. I try to give you more perks than you pay for. So for one of those, for example, is I do usually about 1 to 2 episodes behind the paywall. For example, like the one you're watching right now. So you could have gotten this much earlier. So that's about 4 behind the paywall at any given time is what I usually keep. So that's weeks of paywall content. You also get access to the ad-free RSS feed. You also get access to the Telegram. You get access to the pre-show and priorities for the call-ins on me and Austin's weekly live call-in show, Already Dead, which is on Tuesdays at 9:30 p.m. Eastern. And the highest level is my sponsors, and I give them a big shout-out. Every episode is a big thanks for everything they do. Much like my guest today, Toad, Mike used to be my co-host on the amazing show Tower Gang at Learn to Toad. Yeah, I'm open. I'm open to the idea. I don't think it's happening though. I don't think you'll get him on board. Yeah, well, you can try. You guys can try. At Abrogate D's, at ZLVRCK, at _Invisible, Tim Tuttle, at John Klebold, Will Bell's Delicious Blueberry Rabbit Eye Wine, big fan of the show, Torn May, at Wayne Taculus, and Not Masad. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. This was the final episode of Democracy That Failed. But we'll have more, and I think soon. So with that, we will see you all. Love you. Goodbye.
Peace.